Okay, I believe we're live right now on the webcam. I'm gonna double check. I just printed out the term sheet. Be the big controversy about what is actually contained in the infamous term sheet as far as the deal with pre-development expenses with the entertainment sports complex that seems to be the heart of right now as far as issues, as far as whose fault is it. Somebody's obviously either grossly misinformed or not telling the truth. Is it the city? Or is it the Maloofs? So let's see if we can figure it out. Basically, here it is right here. Sacramento Entertainment and Sports Complex term sheet. It says conceptual approach. But it says March 1st, 2012. Now, I don't know what significance conceptual approach has on it, other than the fact that obviously it's I'm getting some spam jumping up here on my laptop. It's a problem with spam. I'm against spam too, I can tell you that. Let me get this set up so we can actually have a decent conversation. Okay. Now, conceptual approach obviously means conceptual, non-binding, but this is supposed to be the agreement that everybody went in Orlando, discussed, came out, did a victory lap around Arco Arena, holding hands and patting each other on the back. So you look at page 1 of 18, page 2 of 18, page 3 of 18, the schedule. The parties will work cooperatively and make commercially reasonable efforts to open the ESC by September 2015. There it is right here, the second one. The last page of page 3 of 18 of the term sheet. Pre-development expenses. The city shall fund 50%, and the Kings and AEG shall each fund 25% of pre-development expenses. Period. The identification and schedule for pre-development expenses shall be determined in the pre-development agreement to be entered into the parties by April 3rd, 2012. Identification and schedule for pre-development expenses. Okay, so there's been actually, what they're saying there is that there's been actually, they're saying they're going to agree to pay 25% of it, but the identification of the actual expenses and the schedule to be paid is going to be in a separate agreement, a pre-development agreement. So basically this agreement's making reference to another agreement that should have been completed by April 3rd, 2012. I'm going to have to do research to see if that, obviously the Maloofs are balking at that, so there's been no agreement. So right off the bat, the term sheet's been violated conceptually. In the event the ESC is not developed for any other reason than the fault of AEG, the King shall reimburse AEG for its pre-development expense payments on a schedule to be determined. So it looks like AEG covered their back. If there's any default by any party other than theirs, the Kings are going to reimburse AEG. So not only did the Kings, it appear, agree that they were going to pay 25% of pre-development expenses, they went on the hook and said, if we cause a default of this agreement, let me read the language one more time. If the ESC is not developed for any reason other than the fault of the AEG, the Kings shall reimburse AEG. So AEG covered their back. The city obviously didn't cover theirs. So the Kings were actually going on the hook and saying, if we cause any delay in development or didn't make, not delay, but didn't make this process happen, we would reimburse AEG their cost, $3.26 million, as we all know. It appears they're going on the hook and even saying, even if the city of Sacramento causes the default, we're still going to reimburse AEG for the cost. Now, what they're probably hinging on is the fact that they're, which is really poor planning by the city's part, because it appears in the term sheet they're making reference to an additional pre-development agreement. So basically what they're saying is we have an agreement right now to make another agreement by April 3rd, 2012, but we all agree that whatever the terms of that agreement, these particular terms are going to be locked in, that the city pays 50%, Kings pay 25%, AEG pays the other 25%. But I can tell you, if I'm the city of Sacramento, I try and avoid an additional agreement. If we're making an agreement for pre-development expenses right then and there, and the Kings have agreed to pay 25%, it says it right there. The Kings are agreeing to pay 25% of the pre-development expenses. For them to say that they weren't aware of that is reflects either a lack of integrity or ignorance. So either way, they're obviously not the people you want to do business with, but we are where we are, and we're doing business with them right now, whether we like it or not. That could change in the future, but right now they are our business partners. So, off of reading that, I can tell you that the Kings are, as I said, either ignorant or being disingenuous, and the city and the AEG made a mistake too, just not to bind them into it right then and there. Don't make an agreement on pre-development expenses saying that you agree to pay this, but we're going to get into the actual numbers, and the identification and schedule for pre-development expenses shall be determined in the pre-development agreement to be entered into by the parties. I mean, don't make another deadline date. Don't make another situation where we have to get the Maloofs and AEG and everybody on the same page once again. It's been hard enough to do this the whole time. I understand you got to do what you got to do, and we're on a deadline, and maybe that was the reasoning behind it. I was not there. But if I'm negotiating this contract with the Maloofs, I'm trying to pin them into no more deadline. Just you're agreeing to pay 25% of the pre-development expenses. That's it. You might want to put a clause in there unless it's in excess of, some ridiculous number that, shows a lack of good faith on the part of the city and so forth. But you don't need to make another date and another contract, really. I mean, the contract's right there. Just ended that the Maloofs agree to pay, or the Kings agree to pay 25% of the expenses, period. If the Maloofs had a problem with that, you should have tried to negotiate, and maybe they did. Like I said, I wasn't there. I'm just thinking out loud here. I just happened to be on a webcam, but I'm going to try and make some clause where they agree to pay 25% of pre-development expenses unless the pre-development expenses are unreasonable, and unreasonable would begin at this particular number. Kings had to have some idea that it was going to be around the city had to have some idea that it was going to be around 3.26 million at the time. So you obviously put the number at around 5 million, something to that extent, where you have a little cushion, and they have no angle to default later on, other than the fact that this is just a non-binding agreement. But seems to answer that question. Unless, of course, this isn't the term sheet that the Maloofs had actually looked at and so forth and agreed to. I mean, that's the question I would be asking of the Maloofs if I had an opportunity. Is this not what you saw? Was there some different document that you acknowledge? And if there is, can you please provide it, or can you tell us what it said? Because the only document that we have says you owe 25% of the pre-development expenses. So it's extremely frustrating. I don't want to, talk the whole time about the entertainment sports complex. Sacramento is a great city. It unfortunately is right now under the impression that it has to rely on the arena and the Kings to continue to be a great city, which it doesn't. It would just make it, an even greater city than it. Well, we already have them, but it would make it a greater city than it already is, ideally. And there's still a lot of issue on where the funding is coming from and so forth. But I can tell you from just a basic overview of this contract, And I'll be honest, I haven't read through the whole thing, and there might be some clause at the back that some catch-all clause at the back that says none of these terms are actually agreeable unless we sign to it. Well, let me just look at that right now. There's a clause in here for the team name. The Kings shall include Sacramento as the first part of the team's name. Kings may not include any other geographic city, county, or state reference in the team name. It's a good clause. Yeah, here's another clause. Except as otherwise provided, the Kings shall control and retain all revenues relating to Kings events and the team's operation, including revenues from the sale of tickets, broadcasts, and other media rights. Team game day inventory, such as rotating and other customary temporary signage, on-court promotions, seat backs, full pads, etc., and other revenues typically retained 100% by an NBA team. With respect to sales of suites and other premium seating, the Kings shall receive the value of tickets to be agreed upon to Kings events. Additional revenues from such sales, net of expenses to be agreed upon, shall be divided 50% to the Kings and 50% to AEG. AEG shall have the exclusive rights to sell arena signage and naming rights. The parties shall agree on the number of exclusive categories. The team shall contribute an agreed upon level of game day team inventory to such sales, and the revenue from such sales, net of direct expenses, shall be divided 50% to the Kings and 50% to AEG. AEG shall have the exclusive right to sell arena signs and naming rights. I mean, this is what Mayor Johnson and the press has been basically talking about, is that AEG is going to sell the naming rights, and the Kings are going to get 50% of the revenue, which kind of contradicts their argument that, hey, we're just tenants. You know, we don't need to spend money for the pre-development expenses. All we're going to be doing is renting out the place. You're going to be doing more than renting out the place. You're getting perks that tenants, at least in the real world, don't necessarily receive. Once again, if anybody has any questions, any comments, you can submit an email right now to michaelrehm@gmail.com. michaelrehm@gmail.com. I'll respond right now. Here's a big section right here. Capital contribution Kings. The Kings shall pay $73,250,000 towards development and construction of the ESC. Such amount shall include pre-development expenses paid by the Kings as described above. It's pretty cut and dry. The Kings shall have the right, but not the obligation, to obtain private financing for its capital contribution. There's something else the press has been talking about, that basically the moves are broke. It's curious why that sentence would be in there. The King shall have the right, but not the obligation, to obtain private financing for its capital contribution. I'm sure that wasn't the city's idea. I'm sure that wasn't AEG's idea. I'm sure that was the King's idea, to make sure that, you know, they weren't going to be blocked from obtaining money they obviously don't have, if that were to occur. The Kings may utilize ESC revenue streams as entitled to a security for its private financing or other obligations. The city shall reasonably cooperate with the Kings to facilitate the private financing of its capital contribution, including consideration of customary lender protection and/or rights. However, the city shall not be required to incur any cost to provide any form of credit enhancement to facilitate such private financing. Basically, we're not going to co-sign for you. The king shall have the right, but not the obligation, to utilize proceeds from the sale of its approximately 85 acres of land at the site north of Thomas towards its capital contribution or other uses. And then this last line is curious too. The king shall not be responsible for constructing the ESC. Well, pre-development expenses isn't necessarily constructing the ESC, although I can see how they can make an argument out of that. But the second sentence clearly says, such amount shall include pre-development expenses paid by the kings as described above. And of course, as I just discussed 10 minutes ago, actually probably about 19 minutes ago, pre-development expenses, page 318 of the term sheet, March 1st, 2012. The city shall fund 50%, and the Kings and AEG shall fund 25% of the pre-development expenses. It's right there. I don't see any clauses that say that the city has, or the Kings have, or AEG has a certain amount of time to disregard this agreement. Although it obviously is not a binding agreement. Let me read this here because I kind of touch on it in the introduction. Parties acknowledge that this term sheet is not a binding agreement, and that final terms will be incorporated into definitive legal documents which will govern the proposed transaction and will be subject to approval by each party. The parties to intend and negotiate definitive legal documents concerning the ESC, which shall contain the basic terms set forth herein, together with such other terms as mutually agreed upon, consistent with this term sheet, and as are customarily included in similar agreements for the location, financing, ownership, design, development, construction, operation, use, and occupancy of comparable facilities. Parties intend that the planning, design, development, and construction of the ESC will be led by the City of Sacramento, which will have final decision-making authority, subject to the provisions included herein, but that the entire process be cooperative, mutual endeavor, in which the parties actively participate and work together. This is a standard contract term that the Maloofs, or the Kings, I don't want to personalize the Maloofs because something tells me they're not in complete control of the operation with the Kings, but the Sacramento Kings are the party, not the Maloofs, that we're working with here. But the entire process be a cooperative mutual endeavor in which parties actively participate and work together, and here's the key, in good faith and with due diligence. A public-private partnership. So actually the big key is the parties intend to negotiate definitive legal documents concerning the ESC, which shall contain the basic terms set forth herein, together with such other terms as are mutually agreed upon, consistent with the term sheet. So, I mean, there might be, I know this is a non-binding document, but to agree upon this document and then say you're going to make another legal document based on this document and the terms contained herein, and that you're going to act in good faith, and then to later argue that you never agreed to pay any of the pre-development expenses because you're only a tenant, doesn't show good faith. Now, I'm not a contract law attorney, but there's an interesting argument there that, you know, it's it's not an oral contract because there's the term sheet here, which actually would satisfy the statute of frauds. Statute of frauds basically says there has to be some writing in order to prove the existence of a contract if it's over a certain amount. Now, obviously, when I was in law school, the amount was $500. I'm not sure what the actual amount is right now. Obviously, the amount is above $500. Actually, there's a writing in existence. And the city could actually make an argument it is a binding contract based on those provisions. They're not acting in good faith. They're refusing to actually sign definitive legal documents. Although I'm not sure if the city's actually provided any definitive legal documents concerning the ESC. And I'm curious as to the delay on that. If you have a non-binding term sheet conceptual approach here, where we already discussed that there's kind of a quasi-new deadline of April 3rd to agree on the pre-development expenses identification and schedule, I mean, you would think the city would be doing everything it could to present definitive legal documents so we don't have to just rely on this non-binding term sheet conceptual approach, which legally could be considered binding if you brought the right case and you have the right facts. And maybe they have. Maybe the Maloofs have just rejected it. I'm sorry, once again, not the Maloofs. The Kings have rejected it. I don't know. I'll research that. I'm going to take a 5-minute break. Anybody has any questions or any comments or wants to inform me in some error that I might have made in analyzing this, submit the email to michaelrehm@gmail.com. MICHAELREHM@gmail.com. I'll be back in 10.